Same argument, the attribute, that which has mind, should be mindless and matter because of possessing a self which is classified as matter. It follows that the self is also not permanent because first it does not remember but later newly develops memory of past lives. If the life force or self has mind because of having attributes like intelligence, then because of having attributes like pleasure and pain, it should appear as different as pleasure and so forth while experiencing satisfaction and affliction. Thus like pleasure and so forth it cannot be permanent either. Samkhya assertion, if the self is asserted as matter these inconsistencies apply, but since, according to us, the person's nature is to be conscious, there is not the least unwanted entailment.
Answer. Samkhyas define 25 categories of phenomena of which 24 are matter and the 25th is asserted as the knower, person and self. They assert that the person experiences objects which the intellect makes it crave. This is explained extensively elsewhere. If the conscious person is asserted as permanent, it follows that agents such as the eyes and so forth which permit experience of objects are superfluous and useless because the person that experiences objects exists as a permanent functional thing. Fuel is needed to make a fire, but if fire is permanent, fuel is unnecessary. Assertion, the person whose nature is potential consciousness is the experiencer of objects, and being conscious is the activity of experiencing. Since this depends on agents like the eye, there is no flaw.
Answer. Movement does not occur unless, for instance, a tree is agitated by the wind, but those fallacies would entail movement until the substantial entity disintegrates. The phenomenon of activity depends on the substantial entity and is motion. The activity of moving depends on the substantial entity and may cease even though the substantial entity has not disintegrated. The nature of the substantial entity does not likewise change between its production and its disintegration. By contrast, consciousness and the person are an indifferentiable permanent entity. Thus it is improper to claim that the person but not consciousness exists prior to experiencing an object. Assertion, although there is no consciousness prior to experiencing objects, its potential and thus the person exists. Answer. On occasions other than when objects are being experienced one sees potential consciousness, and when objects are being experienced, consciousness itself. In that case, like molten iron which later becomes a solid mass, former potential consciousness later becomes actual consciousness. It therefore follows that the person undergoes change because consciousness and the person are accepted as one entity. Nayaka assertion, our person is not a conscious entity. Since a part of the self, the mere size of a particle, has mind, there is consciousness of objects. It depends on just this part with mind. A person that is conscious and not separate from mind is produced through this association. The person is permanent and very extensive like space.
Answer. Since except for a part as small as a particle the rest of this permanent and extensive self is not associated with consciousness, that self's nature does not seem to have consciousness of objects. Just as it cannot be said that the water of the Ganges is salty because of contact with a grain of salt, it is inappropriate to assert that which is not conscious as the person. If there is a partless permanent self which is omnipresent like space and in each individual sentient being, why would another person not think I in relation to my own self? It follows that they should think of it as I, because the two selves are one. It cannot be omnipresent if the object of someone else's conception of the self is not my own self. Assertion. It is not perceived because it has been obscured by the other's self.
Answer. It is unacceptable to say that the self obscures itself, for there is no duality of that which obscures and that which is obscured. Samkhya assertion, the Great One, a synonym for the intellect, evolves from the principle which is matter and a balance of pleasure, pain, and equanimity. The 3 I principles evolve from the Great One. 11 faculties evolve from the I principle associated with lightness, 5 mental faculties, 5 faculties for action, and the speculative faculty. From the I principle associated with motility come the 5 mere objects, from which the 5 elements evolve. The I principle of darkness acts as the basis for the other 2 I principles. It follows that it is contradictory to assert, as do the Samkhyas, that the principle which is a balance of the 3 attributes is the creator of all manifestations but is never conscious. There is not the least difference between those who assert the like and the insane whose perception is distorted. Since such a contention contradicts reason and conflicts with worldly convention, it is utterly incorrect. What is more illogical than to claim that the attributes whose nature is pleasure, pain and equanimity know how to construct homes and so forth, but do not know how to experience these amenities? It contradicts both reason and convention. Vaisesika assertion, the self alone is the doer of actions and the experiencer of their maturation. Answer, if that is so, the self cannot be permanent.
If the self is an agent, it must be accepted as causing action. If it does not perform actions, it is unsuitable as an agent. That which performs actions like coming and going is not permanent, since one must admit that it differs from before. Something the whole of which is everywhere all the time does not perform activities such as coming and going, since there is no place or time it does not occupy. Assertion, well then, an actionless self exists. Answer.